Marcus Freeman gave us a glimpse into his playbook for how Notre Dame plans to stay elite, from his own personal growth as a head coach to big roster updates and a deep dive into how Notre Dame recruits and retains talent. We're breaking it all down right here on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, and welcome in to another edition of Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and producer at Fox Sports who's been covering the Irish since 2020, and today is Tuesday, June 3rd. And as always, thank you for making this your first watch or listen of the day. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Also want to give a quick shout out to those of you who subscribed on YouTube last week to help us get over 10,000 subscribers. Mission accomplished, and I appreciate each and every one of you who helped us get there. That's pretty cool. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, this is usually a pretty slow time on the college football calendar, which makes it the perfect time for Marcus Freeman to tackle a flurry of media appearances, and he has been doing exactly that. Lately, Freeman's been on somewhat of a press tour. It's like he released a book last week or something. He's been chatting with the local Notre Dame media. He made some appearances on national TV shows and podcasts to really discuss a bunch of different topics, including the upcoming season and the broader college football landscape. So today, we're breaking down the most important insights that he has shared, including his growth as a head coach, what that means for Notre Dame's championship aspirations, along with some key roster updates, injury updates, his approach to the quarterback competition, his thoughts on the USC rivalry, which were pretty pointed, to say the least. He also touched on some scheduling strategies and the transfer portal. So we have a lot to get into today, but I want to start with what I believe is the most important thing and why he believes that Notre Dame is a sustainable championship contender. He spoke openly about how he's improved as a head coach going into his fourth season, and his evolution directly ties to the culture, depth, and player development strategies that can keep the Irish in the championship conversation. But the biggest thing is his experience. It's something that really he's stressed for years now. Most of it was pertaining to the quarterback that Notre Dame planned to start. When he brought in Sam Hartman, he talked a lot about his experience. When he brought in Riley Leonard, he talked a lot about his experience. Well, in this case, he's talking about his own experience, and he said, quote, "There's no substitute for experience." And he's had one hell of a journey at Notre Dame. He has not been around for a very long time, but certainly a lot has happened in the short amount of time that he's been the head coach. From early stumbles against Marshall and Stanford to a 14-2 season that culminated in a national title appearance. But along that ride, there was a loss to Northern Illinois mixed in there with a bunch of double-digit wins after that too. So he has really become a more complete coach because of everything that he has had to deal with since becoming the head coach of Notre Dame. And I really think that once you become the head coach of a place like Notre Dame, you age kind of like the president, where 1 year is not 1 year. It's basically like 3 years. And I think what Marcus Freeman has been able to experience in his 3 seasons as the head coach has helped shape him into what he is today. And I think his willingness to learn and evolve, adapt himself on the job says a lot about him, because it's one thing to preach to his players that you got to learn, you got to listen to your coaches, but then for Marcus Freeman to really look in the mirror after every season and go out on his own and try to find more advice, try to find more mentors. Like he was talking to Nick Sirianni, the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, about how he needs to, or how to really help your team get over the final hump, because the Eagles lost in the Super Bowl a couple years ago to the Chiefs, and then they just smoked them this past season. I think Marcus Freeman is always willing to learn and adapt and build on what he's been growing. He's built something really special at Notre Dame, and I think there's multiple different reasons why Notre Dame has built a sustainable contender, and the number one thing is recruiting in depth. Because college football is a talent acquisition business. You can have a lot of great coaches on your staff, but if you cannot recruit good players and then have those players stay on at your program, you're probably not going to be very good. And Notre Dame has been able to improve their personnel year over year through high school recruiting and the transfer portal. I'm sure you've heard the quote many times. They're going to major in high school recruiting, or they're going to minor in the portal. Well, they're doing a pretty good job minoring in the portal, and we saw that in that game against Georgia last year when it felt like the transfer portal game, when every single one of Notre Dame's transfers had a key moment in that game that helped secure the win. Now, I think the Irish have their deepest roster than they've had in years. Now, obviously, they lost some key players like Xavier Watts, Mitchell Evans, but I think when you look top to bottom, this roster is loaded with talent. And that depth showed up in some critical moments last season that is going to help them this year. Think about Leonard Moore coming in to replace Benjamin Morrison. If that had not happened, if Benjamin Morrison just played out the year, I think the results would have been pretty much the same defensively, and then we would be talking about the starting corner opposite Christian Gray going into this season. But Leonard Moore got his opportunity after Benjamin Morrison got hurt. He went out and shined. And now there are no questions about what Notre Dame is doing at corner this season. There is just pure optimism because of what Leonard Moore showed last season. But you also have someone like Anthony Knapp, who wasn't even that highly recruited, ends up starting week 1 against Texas A&M and really shined all season long despite some early bumps and bruises when he was still trying to really get his feet underneath him going up against some big-time college football players. So you get players like that, the high-end players who everyone wants, like a Jeremiah Love, but it's also those guys like an Anthony Knapp who I think diamond in the rough might be a little bit dramatic, but I think those are the type of players that can really separate the good teams from the great teams when you just have a stacked roster and you continue to develop players, because that's the second most important thing. It's not just about bringing guys in. You have to maximize their ability once they get there. And I think this coaching staff has done a great job of developing players and not just the starters, because it's a lot easier to develop the starters because they're getting the most reps in practice and they're getting the most reps in the game. But how do you develop the guys behind them? Like a junior Tuialamaka, who was the third string Viper going into last season. He gets his opportunity once Traore and Botello go down, and he shines. Like the fact that Tuialamaka came in as a Mike linebacker, makes the move to defensive end, and finally, in his third year with the program, has his time to shine and then takes advantage of it. Like that certainly caught me by surprise, and credit to Al Washington and the rest of the defensive staff for getting him ready to play, because that's not easy. Same with Leonard Moore, true freshman who had to wait his turn before Benjamin Morrison got hurt. Aeneas Williams, a true freshman running back who was behind Jeremiah Love, who was behind Jadarian Price. But when he got his opportunity, he went out and took advantage of it. And that is because of the work that they put in practice, in the weight room. All that stuff matters to their development, and the coaching staff, despite some turnover with assistants, they've continued to develop players, and I expect that to continue going forward because Notre Dame has a very strong staff to support Marcus Freeman. So if you get really good players in, you develop them once they're there, you also have to have the buy-in from those players to put the program and the team above themselves. And that is very hard to do in modern college football, where players like to leave at the first sign of adversity. And I thought Marcus Freeman had a very key quote here. He said, quote, "If you don't put Notre Dame in front of yourself, you're not going to be a part of this thing." Again, it's easy to say it. It's a lot harder to practice it. And I really believe that Notre Dame's players practice that. And we saw that last year with so many guys coming in, making plays, who some guys like a junior Tuialamaka who probably could have transferred after, or at least redshirted and then decided to enter the portal after the fourth game, but he stuck around and then it worked out for him. And I think that is a great message that he can now say to all the players on the roster, some guys who aren't going to be playing a lot earlier in the season, like, hey, if you stick around, things are going to happen this season. It's a long season. Notre Dame expects to go far in the college football playoff. They are going to need a lot of players to contribute in order for them to achieve their goals. And I think because of what they did last season, it's easier for these guys to buy in. And Marcus Freeman has always talked about like putting Notre Dame ahead of themselves, and like that's why they don't really go after the guys who NIL is their top priority, because once you get to Notre Dame, it's pretty hard, not just with the football program, but the school, living in South Bend, the lack of a social life, the weather, all that stuff. So if you're able to put the school and the program ahead of yourself, you are going to be able to buy into this thing, and it's going to work out better for you in the long run. I think we're starting to see the signs of that, and that's a big reason why Notre Dame barely lost anyone to the transfer portal. Like, yeah, they lost Pat Coogan. Yeah, they lost Rocco Spindler. They lost Steve Angeli. Not a single one of those guys was guaranteed to start this upcoming season. So when you look at what this team has done throughout the time that Marcus Freeman has been the head coach, there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic. There's also some counter arguments to this, right? Like TCU made the national championship a couple years ago. They lost that game, then they fell off. They didn't just lose. They lost by $1 billion. They got ran off the field by Georgia in SoFi that night. Then Washington, they went to the national title game. They lost to Michigan. Then they fell off last season. So why isn't Notre Dame going to do the same? Well, Marcus Freeman is still around. That's very important because Kalen DeBoer left Washington right after they made the national title. And I think that Sonny Dykes, the head coach at TCU, he didn't really strike gold in the transfer portal in the year after they went to the national championship like he did the season prior. He also kind of got another stroke of luck with Max Duggan Whereas like Notre Dame, what they're building, it feels a lot more sustainable because they didn't have everything go their way last season. As a matter of fact, a lot of things went against them with how many players got hurt, how many key players got hurt, but they were able to continue to bring in the next man up, and that player was able to succeed because he's been bringing in good players, he's been able to develop them, and those players are bought in to the program. So with Marcus Freeman at the helm, I think he's already provided plenty of reasons to believe he understands not only what it takes to get there, because we saw that last season, but he also understands what it's going to take to get over the hump. And I think his approach, using his own experience, the experience of others, the culture, depth, and development, that is what has turned Notre Dame into a sustainable contender with a blueprint that is built to last. All right, coming up, Marcus Freeman also gave some key updates on how he's approaching the quarterback competition, some under-the-radar players to watch out for, injuries, and even tease how the Irish are going to have to handle key offensive situations. That's next. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. But my favorite thing about Monarch is that it helps you with your short and long-term goals. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Marcus Freeman provided some very interesting insight into how he's balancing competition, health, and creative offense to set the Irish up for success this season. Because obviously, it's thrilling to talk about the long-term plan and the long-term vision under Marcus Freeman, and there are plenty of reasons to be optimistic about the future. But when you look at the very near future and you look ahead to what's coming up for the Irish this season, there's plenty of reasons to be excited as well. But the biggest story of this offseason has been the quarterback battle. And Freeman learned some pretty valuable lessons from the Buckner-Pine competition in 2022, and I was a little bit surprised, to be honest with you, when he opened up about that. He said that he learned that you can't really skew the competition to one person, because he even admitted that going into 2022, he expected Tyler Buckner to be the starter, and the competition was kind of skewed for him to become the starter, and Drew Pine didn't really have a fair shot. Now, do I think that anything would have changed if they were given an equal opportunity and they split the reps up 50-50 in practice? No, because I think Tyler Buckner was a better quarterback than Drew Pine was then, and I think he still is today. But the fact is, he didn't really give Pine a fair shot. And I guess you could make the case that Drew Pine might have been able to succeed or might have been set up for more success if they had split the reps up a little bit differently. So when Tyler Buckner got hurt, Drew Pine could have come in, and maybe he would have been more prepared. It's impossible to say for certain because it's in the past. This is all hypothetical. But it's important for Marcus Freeman to learn from that experience and make sure that C.J. Carr and Kenny Minchey have a fair shot at this quarterback, at the starting quarterback job. Because even though I've been pretty open about the fact that I think C.J. Carr is going to end up being the starting quarterback, and I think most people in the media share that same opinion, Kenny Minchey is very talented, and he absolutely deserves a shot to be QB1. He's been practicing every day for 2 years. He's been in this system under Mike Denbrock for the same amount of time that C.J. Carr has. He's actually played a little bit more on Saturdays than C.J. Carr. So even if I think C.J. Carr will end up being the option there, Kenny Minchey deserves a fair shot, and I'm glad that Marcus Freeman is going to give it to him. But as for how he's going to evaluate the quarterbacks, he has started to give us a little bit of insight, and I think the way I interpret it is that it's going to be hell for these quarterbacks in practice. He hasn't come out and said that like they're going to be hitting or they're going to get hit, they're going to be in normal jerseys or anything like that. That's not going to be the case. They're not going to be getting hit in practice, hopefully, because C.J. Carr did get hit in practice last year, and that's what led to his season-long injury. But I think that he's going to create very intense situations for these guys, and he's going to throw them into the fire. They're going to be put into uncomfortable situations, and they are going to be asked to execute in order to win this job. And I understand why he's doing it. I support it, because these guys have to figure out what it's like to be out there and be uncomfortable so that they are ready to handle those situations, which are absolutely going to happen when they're on the road in the season opener against Miami, and they've got Texas A&M and a Mike Elko-led defense coming to South Bend in week 2. Like, you can't recreate game experience. There's no way to do it. Like Marcus Freeman said himself, there's no substitute for experience, but you can at least give them experience being uncomfortable, dealing with adversity, and then having to execute in those moments. Because for as much as Marcus Freeman likes to talk about how he needs his guys to focus on being the best version of themselves and not look at how the other player performs, it's human nature when you're in a competition, specifically with one other person, to be interested and to be looking over your shoulder to see how they perform. And I think that's going to be a constant battle between these two guys. And honestly, it's probably already started in the summer. The guys just got back to school, and they're going to be on campus. They're going to be able to work out with Lauren Lando. They're not going to be able to work out with the coaching staff, but believe me when I tell you there's going to be all kinds of player-led workouts, all kinds of things like that for these quarterbacks to compete against each other. And I am very excited to see how it plays out, but I also am impressed by how Marcus Freeman understands what it's going to take to put these guys into high-pressure situations so that they are ready to go once the start of the season comes around. Freeman also shed some light on how they plan to innovate on offense, because he was asked about what their get-out-of-jail-free card is going to be this season, because last year it was very clearly Riley Leonard, QB power on 3rd and short and 4th and short. And they were very effective last year at creating 4th and short situations, because when it was 3rd and long, they weren't even necessarily trying to convert more than half of the time. They were just trying to get into a 4th and short because they knew that if they just ran with Riley Leonard, odds are they were going to get the first down. And Freeman even pointed out that Kenny Minchey is not as good of a runner as Riley Leonard is. And the reason he brought that up is because he also talked about how the offense benefited from the fact that when Riley Leonard had the ball, they had one more blocker. Whereas, like, if CJ Carr hands the ball off to Jeremiah Love, it's great that the ball is in Love's hands, but now they have one less blocker because CJ Carr is basically out of the play. And we saw last year, Jeremiah Love was not afraid to stick his nose in there and block, and then he would talk some trash after the fact. Like, didn't really expect Jeremiah Love to be a great lead blocker, but there were some situations where he was acting like a fullback for Riley Leonard. Still, I do think that Jeremiah Love is going to be the quote-unquote get-out-of-jail-free card because he is just that good. Also, the offensive line should be a lot better this season. And we saw what Jeremiah Love can do in short-yardage situations on one knee, like what he did against Penn State in the college football playoff semifinal when he shook off like 5 dudes on his way for a critical touchdown in the second half of that game. Personally, I'd love to see 2 running backs on the field at the same time, specifically Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, and even more so if they're running Jeremiah Love in the slot and they're trying to get him reps as like a true slot receiver, even though he's obviously far better off as a running back. But for whatever reason, they just have not done it that often, not just under Mike Denbrock, but under Jared Parker or Tommy Rees. And I thought Tommy Rees, for all the complaints about him as a play caller and as an evaluator of quarterbacks, I thought he was very creative as an offensive play caller. And even he didn't run 2 running backs on the field all that often. And they had Audric Esme and Logan Diggs in his last season. So I'm hoping that they do it. I think there's a lot of fun things that they can do with Love and Price on the field at the same time. But even if it's not something like that where they're running 21 personnel, I think that they're going to have plenty of options in those short yardage situations. And I think that the fact that Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr have been in the system for 1 full season under Mike Denbrock is a big advantage, because even though Riley Leonard had game experience, he did not have experience under Mike Denbrock, and he didn't even have a spring. So he tried to soak it all in as much as he could when he wasn't able to participate in practice. But I think we saw early on in the season when the offense wasn't clicking, that mattered. The fact that he wasn't able to practice, the fact that he didn't fully understand the system was very apparent when they couldn't move the ball early on in the season. And then Denbrock and Leonard even talked about they had to meet and they had to get on the same page earlier so that they could get the offense on the right track. Marcus Freeman talked about some under-the-radar players. He was asked specifically about Carson Hobbs on defense, and Freeman is very confident in his ability, but he also made a funny comment about Carson Hobbs' confidence and said that can be a problem, that can be his issue, because he's not afraid to talk some trash, and he talked to the media and basically said that he believes he's the fastest player on the team, he's the best athlete on the team, which is great, but sometimes when you're that confident and you get beat a few times, sometimes players like that, their confidence wanes quickly and they aren't able to sustain that, and that affects their play. That cannot happen with Carson Hobbs, and I think Marcus Freeman alluded to that, but I thought something that was very interesting was when he was talking about the other safety position, because he said Adon Schuler is going to be the starter. He mentioned Luke Talich, Tay Johnson, and Jalen Stroman as some guys who need to step up. I still think Jalen Stroman is going to be the starter at safety against Miami, but considering he didn't participate in spring practice at all, and the fact that Marcus Freeman named Talich and Johnson before him, I'm more open to the idea that maybe Stroman is going to be like Rod Hurd 2.0, who was brought in and everyone expected he would be the starter, and then he got beat out by a younger player. Still, I have high hopes for Stroman as a player, and Marcus Freeman has high hopes for tight end James Flanagan. This would be big for me personally because I just did a show, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, when I talked about who I think will be the top 5 most impactful true freshmen on the team this season. And I put James Flanagan at number 1, not Madden Framo. And I feel like I was kind of going out on a limb with that. He wasn't even on the team in spring practice, so he didn't have like the great spring like Elijah Burris, but I'm really hopeful that he's going to be able to go out there and make some plays as a true freshman. And Marcus Freeman seemed to say the same as well. They think he's going to be very impactful this year, and it makes sense. It's also part of the reason why they didn't go out and get a tight end in the transfer portal in the spring window. But on the topic of players this season, it looks like Jordan Botelho, Ashton Craig, Boubacar Traore, and Malachi Fields are expected to be 100% for the start of fall camp. Marcus Freeman spoke about that in the spring. He reiterated it last week with the Notre Dame media. He did not mention Gerby Lambert. I don't know if that was just an omission on his part, but even though Lambert was not a starter last year, he was expected to be a key player or potentially a key player this season as he competed for the starting job at left tackle or maybe even right tackle, depending on how things played out. But he was a player that a lot of people were excited about going into spring. Then he suffered a shoulder injury, and I think he's going to be back for fall camp, but Marcus Freeman did not really elaborate on his health. He did say that Malachi Fields is going to be ready to go. Couldn't participate in spring because he didn't graduate from Virginia just yet. But Malachi Fields also suffered a sports hernia, according to John Bryce. And it would be great if he's 100% ready to go for the start of fall camp because he needs to get in sync with these quarterbacks. Last thing I want to mention, Tyler Buchner's role. I think we all assume he's going to end up playing quarterback, which is his natural position, even though he played walk-on wide receiver last year. Marcus Freeman was asked about it. He teased but not confirmed the move. He said the depth chart announcement is going to come around the start of fall camp. But to me, that feels like an announcement within a non-announcement. I think Tyler Buchner is going to be a quarterback on the team this year. So most of the discussion about the roster has been nothing but positive. I do think that when you consider the fact they have an inexperienced quarterback, they got some questions at wide receiver, it's fair to have a little bit of concerns about the offense until we actually see Malachi Fields go out there and be the wide receiver one option that some people think he can be, and we see Jaden Greathouse replicate his performances in the last 2 games of the season, and he's been a more consistent player in 2025. But still, I think that Marcus Freeman's confidence in the roster is very telling. Not just with the top 22 guys, but the 23 to 45 range as well. And he knows that they're going to count on them in order for this team to go where they want to go. And in terms of overall talent, I really do believe that this year's roster has more talent than last year's. I think Marcus Freeman would even agree with me there. But there are so many other variables that matter. So we're going to see if this group is able to maximize their skill set. All right, next up, we're going to zoom out for Freeman's thoughts on USC, how his staff evaluates players, and his vision for transfer portal reform in college football, plus what it all says about the future of Notre Dame football. Okay, I've got a couple more things I want to touch on before we wrap things up, and one point that I brought up many times before on the show. For as new school as Marcus Freeman is, for as much as he is a modern college football coach, right? For as much as he is a player's coach, there's a lot of old school in him as well. His mentor is Jim Tressel. That's about as old school as it gets. And you might not see it all the time, but we saw glimpses of it last year. Marcus Freeman will get on his players. We saw him go after Adon Schuler after he got an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty against Miami, I believe it was, Miami, Ohio. He also really laid into Sam Pendleton at one point, I believe it was the Florida State game, because he got an unsportsmanlike. Although, in fairness to Sam Pendleton, I think he was actually coming to the defense of one of his own players. So in that instance, I did not agree with Marcus Freeman. But I think what we're seeing lately is his modern approach goes beyond just how he treats his players from a personal standpoint. I think he's always trying to stay ahead of the game. And I think that shines through with the way that he evaluates players and the way that he has set up his program to evaluate players, because he has a very collaborative approach. No one has too much power, collective decisions are key, and the head coach only steps in when he's needed. Here's his quote. No one person in this program has too much power. There's no one person who has autonomy, and that's including the head coach. If I really, really like somebody and the position coach and the GM and the coordinator don't like him, well, guess what? It doesn't matter, end quote. There are not a ton of head coaches who actually feel this way. and they might not practice it. And I thought this was really interesting for a couple reasons. On one hand, I think it shed some light on why it didn't work out with James Blanchard, the general manager at Texas Tech. I don't know why I almost said Texas A&M there. A lot of people thought, myself included, we thought that James Blanchard was going to be the replacement for Chad Bowden as general manager after Bowden left for USC. Blanchard was on campus. There was a lot of reports, a lot of smoke that he was going to be the guy. But then it didn't really work out. It started to drag on for a little bit, and then they both kind of went their separate ways. Well, in the time since, a lot of the reporting has indicated that James Blanchard wanted basically full autonomy. He wanted to be able to, offer a scholarship to players that he wanted, pick out guys in the transfer portal. Obviously, there'd be input from Marcus Freeman and the coaching staff, but Blanchard basically wanted to be able to operate on his own in some capacity. That's not going to work at a place like Notre Dame. But I think that's exactly what he has at Texas Tech, which is why he stayed there. Plus, he got a big raise out of the whole deal. But with Marcus Freeman, he's not one to do that. He understands his role, and he understands that he hires his staff to do their job. He believes in them. He trusts them. And he understands that, hey, sometimes he might get outnumbered. Maybe there's a situation or two where Marcus Freeman has to come in and overrule on a decision. I think that happens all the time. But when it comes to evaluating players, I think it's very empowering for his staff because I think we all deal with this in our own lives, right? If you have a boss who micromanages every single thing that you do, you're not going to feel confident in your own work, and you're not going to be able to maximize your own ability because you're not going to be trying to do what's best, what you think is best. All you're going to be doing is trying to appease what you think your boss wants, and that is not a healthy way to operate. So Marcus Freeman empowers his staff to do what they think is best, and then he takes all of their collective decisions, and that goes in every single player. And I think that I would love to see or hear maybe one example of a situation where maybe Marcus Freeman wasn't super high on a guy, right? But the rest of his staff was. Maybe it panned out. Maybe it didn't, right? He would never do that, at least not on the record. But I think it's a really interesting way to go about it. And he brought in Mike Martin, who is experiencing the NFL. He's got a bunch of assistant coaches who are really good at recruiting, and they're really good at developing players. So it's important for them to have the power to make these decisions, and credit to Marcus Freeman for letting them do that. He also talked about his preference for a single transfer portal window in the spring. This has been a big talking point around college football. All coaches have their own opinion, but Marcus Freeman said that he wants it in the spring to reduce distractions during the postseason, which I totally get, and also helps new coaches convince players to stay, because he pointed out how if an assistant coach leaves in like the winter, right, they take a new job, well, then some player might be like, all right, well, I'm out the door. But he doesn't even give the new coach an opportunity, right? So let's say that there was a player, maybe a running back on Notre Dame's roster, who wanted to leave after Deal McCullough left, but they couldn't do it. And then Jaywan Sider comes in, does a really good job, and then all of a sudden they decide, hey, I actually do want to stick around because you like this new coach. That's what Marcus Freeman is talking about there, even though that actually did not happen with Notre Dame this cycle because everyone decided to stay. He also admitted, and I do think this is important, Notre Dame would have an advantage academically if there was only one portal window and it was in the spring after the school year ends, because I think he's referring to how undergraduate transfers, it's harder to get them in halfway through the school year, just with the way that Notre Dame transfer admissions works, and it's harder to get those done in the middle of the year. I've talked about this before. I transferred into Notre Dame. You could not even do it until your freshman year was completely over, whereas at other schools, you could apply at the end of your first semester of your freshman year. But I do think that looking beyond just your freshman year, it creates complications as well. So that plays a factor in this as well. But he also said that he supports grad transfers. They'll even help him find a new destination if it makes sense, so long as they have their degree. He talked about Steve Angeli and how he wishes him the best. He's a big fan of him, and it just made sense for him to move on at this point. He got his degree. Now he's going to be able to go to Syracuse and have an opportunity to be the starting quarterback. So he's had a much more modern approach to the locker room, how he evaluates his guys, and then once they're on campus, figuring out the best situation for him. But another key here is that Notre Dame, in their run to the national championship, made some pretty strong headways in the South. And now Notre Dame's visibility after that playoff run has made them more attractive to recruits in the SEC country. Marcus Freeman even admitted that. He said you would be surprised by how many kids don't really know much about Notre Dame and didn't know much about Notre Dame until this run. And Notre Dame is striking while the iron is hot to get those kids from the part of the country who didn't really know that much about Notre Dame before. But now that they made it to the national championship, now that they beat Georgia, now that they beat Penn State, all of a sudden those players are looking at Notre Dame in a different way than they probably ever would have before. And lastly, Marcus Freeman had some pretty pointed comments about the state of the USC rivalry. he has unwavering support for continuing this rivalry, and I've got to give you the full quote here. Quote, "It's pretty black and white for me. You want my opinion? I want to play them every single year. When? I don't care. I don't care when we play them. Start of the season, middle of the season, end of the season, I don't care. I want to play USC every year because it is great for college football." End quote. Obviously, I agree. And Notre Dame is absolutely winning the PR battle in this one. Will it mean anything in the end? I don't know. But for now, as this continues to drag on, we don't know what the future is going to be. At least we know where Notre Dame stands. So no matter what happens with this rivalry, if it ends up dying and it's another loss in the conference realignment era, that would be incredibly sad, incredibly disappointing. But at least we know that Notre Dame did everything they possibly could to keep this rivalry going. And they had Marcus Freeman, their head coach, leading the cause, and they had their athletic director, Pete Bavacqua, saying the same exact thing. These two guys are in lockstep. They are not running from competition. They are trying to add it, and USC is not doing the same. So they can kind of hide behind the veil of like college football playoff expansion and things like that. But I do love that Marcus Freeman has just come out and said what we all say as well. So I think when you look at this overall, you think about everything that he said. I think he's balancing the old school with the new era, keeping traditions like USC while also being modern in his approach to roster management, evaluation, all of that. And I think all of that comes together to make Notre Dame a sustainable, competitive force. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first watch or listen of the day. I'm going to be back here tomorrow morning with part 2 of my biggest questions about the Notre Dame roster. We're going to focus on the defense because I did my biggest questions about the offense on Wednesday of last week. So if you haven't tuned into that episode yet, make that your second watch or listen before tomorrow. And if you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Leave a review and share it with fellow Notre Dame fans. We're still doing stuff throughout the offseason, and I am always grateful for the support, especially from those of you on YouTube who helped get the channel to over 10,000. That was really cool, and I appreciate everyone who helped us get there. Same time, same place tomorrow, guys. I'll see you then.